Welcome, everybody. This is Dr. Paul. You know me from my own Substack as well as the Men's Psychology Substack and Romatopedia Substack. And I see a lot of people already joining in here. And okay, good, that worked. I'm joined by Katie Angelova MD, whom I believe I might have met you just at your wedding. Right? Is that where we met?
That might be right. That might be right.
I think that's a first for me. So your wedding was lovely, wonderful in New York, Staten Island. I enjoyed that. But the reason I'm having you on is because you've become quite the author, and you have a very compelling topic. And I'm curious about how you came to this topic. Seeing you on other podcasts, it reminded me of my own med school days and residency days, and something very needed for which there has been no terminology, I think, up until now. So tell us a little bit about how you came to no-mergency as a concept, how not every urgency is an urgency, really.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul, and thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's joining. I really love sharing this concept because it has kind of changed my life and how I view everything that goes on around me. So I really do love to talk about it. I'm a psychiatrist. I work in a hospital setting. And there's this saying that kind of goes, unless you're in a hospital, right? It's not an emergency. But the reality is that a lot of things in hospitals are not an emergency either, right? Hospitals are very corporate. There's a lot of, interpersonal stuff. There's a lot of pressures, meetings, right? Things go on that are not necessarily life-saving emergencies. And so this concept of no-mergency basically came out of me going through burnout at some point in my medical career and watching some of my colleagues go through burnout and kind of wondering like what is going on here? Why are we so overextended? Why are we so kind of always on edge, right? Always kind of waiting for the next shoe to drop, right? And I think the reality is that there's a lot of things that are presented to us in our environment as urgent that really aren't. And so I've kind of coined this term to describe something that feels very urgent, but doesn't really align with our priorities or our long-term goals. And so essentially, what we're looking at is distraction after distraction after distraction that occupies all of our time, right? And we end up feeling like we're productive, we're hustling, we're doing something, and we're just kind of worn out at the end of the day. We turn around, we take a look, we realize that our actual priorities are still sitting on the back burner. And that is, I think, what burns us out.
Wow, wow, what a concept! For everybody to know, this is book No-mergency is available on Amazon. You can search it on Amazon, find it. Katie eventually is going to be doing coaching, which you can also sign up to. She has an Instagram, and I want to just put that out there right at the beginning. What's your Instagram handle, Katie?
So it's NO_mergency. So no emergency, just an underscore between that no and emergency.
Okay, great. So I told you before we got on, I didn't want to ruin things by telling you a bunch of stories, from my own training. And I'm kind of an old timer. It goes back quite a ways to med school for me. And I started as a surgery trainee. So I was in trauma surgery before switching to anesthesia, before switching to psychiatry. And a lot of it was, I think, this concept. I think that the concept of no-mergency could apply to anyone and everyone. especially those of us that work, very busy careers and kind of make a big deal out of nothing sometimes. Um, but one story I was going to tell you is while I was doing trauma surgery, this was University of Pittsburgh, and the on-call room for surgeons was on the like right below the roof, right below the helicopter pad. So, okay, let me make sure this is still going to work. Do you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you hear me. All right. Yeah. So the on-call room's right under the helicopter pad, and you can hear the choppa 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 coming in. And then it's another few minutes before this was the day when we had pagers, back when we still had pagers that would buzz and ring and beep and things like this. So a few minutes after you started hearing the choppa choppa, the pager is like beep, 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 like waking you out of a sound sleep. And your heart is racing. And I swear it was like a Pavlovian, conditioning response, because for years after no longer being a surgery resident, going into psychiatry, when my pager would go, we still had pagers for a few more years after that. When the pager would go off, my heart would race. And when I hear helicopter blades to this day, it's almost like my heart starts racing. Um, and and now that is an emergency because it's surgery, but the pager going off for routine circumstances, like, somebody needs a med renewed, and it could be, they have days to go before that's going to occur. So many things are unnecessary. So that's the first story from my life that came to mind when I learned about your concept.
I love that story, and I love that, it's interesting, right? Because like you said, you are talking about a real life or death emergency here, right?
Right,
But the concept is very similar to all of these other things that we get conditioned to, right?
right.
And you mentioned the pager, but I think it's very similar with our phones now, right?
Yes,
Because we
yes.
actually don't know what's on the other side of that ping, right? And I think
Right,
that we have so many notifications coming in at all hours of the day. Um, and we just don't know what's on the other side, and sometimes urgency is really used to sell us stuff, right? To to
right,
control kind
right.
of like what we look at or what we buy or what we pay attention to, right? I mean, how many times do you get the breaking news notification, right? Or the
Yeah,
the
yeah,
your cart, something's in your cart and it's getting sold out, right? Quick, buy it. And we're just constantly attached to this device that is making us feel like it is a life or death situation every 5 minutes of every day, and that is exhausting to our nervous systems.
yeah. And we're going to go into that a little bit. It occurs to me also there are um, there are other kinds of relationships other than sales uh, relationships. People try to get our attention. Anybody could be trying to get our attention. It could be our child, our parent, our sibling, a friend, our spouse, and not everything is urgent. But for a lot of people, I mean, this is a branch point really to narcissism. People who are very narcissistic, let's say more than we are, we all have some narcissism, right? According to Kohut and Kernberg. But someone who's way more narcissistic than us, everything is urgent to that person. They need to get a hold of you right now, right away. And it's because they can't find the Ziploc bags in the kitchen, or the pet just pooed. And are you going to clean it up? Something like this. So, I mean, I think that's a connection too. A definite branch point to narcissism is one thing that strikes me about this. Family estrangement. Um, people who are on either end of estrangement, like the person that doesn't want to be bothered and is estranged. They don't want any pings, and perhaps they don't want any calls or texts. And then to the person on the other end of it, they may feel an urgency I mean, it's their loved one and there's a misunderstanding going on. So, what do you think about these other kinds of broad societal problems? Really, narcissism is a big one, and estrangement as well.
Absolutely. And I think urgency is used very often in our society as essentially a manipulation tactic, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
We talk about kind of like the social heuristic of like scarcity, for example, which I was talking about with like things selling out in your shopping cart or whatever.
Yes.
But unfortunately, sometimes, narcissism is one of those kind of examples, I think, when people are unfortunately in abusive relationships or emotionally manipulative relationships, sometimes urgency really is used as a form of abuse, right? Because when we don't have control over our time, when we don't have control over how we respond and what we respond to, we're sort of constantly in this fight or flight state, right? And that shuts down our prefrontal cortex, right? And that's the part of our brain that really thinks rationally and logically and plans, right? And so for the abuser, they don't want us thinking rationally. They don't want us seeing the situation for what it is. They want us constantly kind of in a rush, in a blur, confused, right? And just kind of attending to the thing that is most urgent in that moment. So
Right.
I think
Right.
you're right that urgency really is used, unfortunately, sometimes in these dynamics where somebody is not in a good emotional space.
That's interesting. You just pointed out to me it might not just be that the narcissistic person feels that a thing is urgent. It might be they are consciously or unconsciously just doing a thing to you to crack the whip on you. They call it the narcissistic fog and this sort of thing. Answer now. What are you doing? Answer right now. This sort of thing. So okay, so that's interesting. I want to know your perspective on two other related topics. I think that come up for me. One is just boots on the ground kind of a thing. New nurses come in all the time where I work. Other nurses are leaving. The new ones need to kind of get trained up to how do we do things around here, kind of a thing. And they do a lot of manning of the phones, and it's kind of a primary uh, primary care model, primary care practice model. Like your internist, you don't directly call their cell. You reach their nurses. The nurses tell them what's going on, and they tell the nurses what to tell you back. So all the time, new people, I'm having to teach the concept they already know called triage. And so there's emergency, there's urgency, and then it's neither. And if it's neither, I'm doing outpatient as my main thing I do. And so outpatient is the lowest level of triage. It's not like level 3 trauma center hospital level. It's the lowest
Right.
level. It's for the most stable people. So most things that belong in this domain are non-emergencies and not urgencies, although they can crop up and then those need triaged. So the highest level is go to an ER. An intermediate level might be see another specialist or make some more calls. And then the lowest level is it's not an emergency at all. And and so a lot of the time I have to simplify and say, okay, is this something worthy of an ER visit? If no, then it probably can wait for an appointment. Although we want to be courteous and do good customer service and this sort of thing, that's not the same as medical triage, doing good customer service. So that's one concept I wanted to pick your brain about, what you think of that or what you have seen surrounding that kind of scenario. Triage.
Yeah. Triage. It's it's interesting, right? Because I think, not only in medical situations, but in all sorts of life situations, sometimes, the person who shouts the loudest, right, creates the most urgency. And we see we see this a lot. I mean, even like, I work in the emergency, room sometimes too, and I certainly do, psychiatric consults there, right? And sometimes the consult we receive is, it's prefaced with come now, come quick, right? This person has been depressed for the last 15 years, right?
Right.
And
Or they want something. They want
yeah,
something and they want it now.
yeah, yeah. And I think, sometimes we don't kind of stop to think, and we do rush because the person on the other end is rushing, right? And urgency is certainly contagious, I think. Um and so it's just so important to, I think, take that pause, just a couple of seconds. And this is what I teach my trainees and people I work with as well, is just 3 seconds, 4 seconds, right? Nothing, is going to change in those couple of seconds, but what is going to change is that amygdala reaction, that fight or flight that you've just entered, is going to have a little bit of time to calm, and then your prefrontal cortex is gonna come back online, and you can actually decide for yourself whether this is urgent or trivial, right? And then you can kind of act accordingly, because I think sometimes we get caught up in, whatever that person on the other end is, describing as urgent, right? And it becomes very contagious, and then we just go with it.
That reminds me a little bit of author Dan Goleman, who I believe is a journalist, perhaps. I'm not sure he's a psychologist, but he wrote the book Emotional Intelligence that everybody has talked about for decades since. And he talks about how a simple tool to use in everyday life is take a time out, take a walk for 10 seconds. And that way it gives your prefrontal cortex the 10 seconds to get caught up. It's slow compared to the amygdala, or what I like calling the reptilian brain, as an evolutionary psychology oriented person. Um, it gives the amygdala a chance to catch up, to take a timeout, to give yourself a timeout. So that kind of reminds me of that. Yeah. What else? You also this doesn't have to be purely medical staff people experiencing this, although I definitely connect to it and had no phrase or words for it prior to your idea and to your book, that there was this just ingrained Pavlovian conditioning that has gone on like all through my medical training and everyone else I know. But this could apply to really anybody in any walk of life. Um, I was reminded of it was either President Eisenhower or President Truman. I think Truman, who had the 4-box grid for problem solving. And on the x-axis was urgent and non-urgent, and on the y-axis was important and unimportant. So you could have, most of the things in our lives are urgent and unimportant. That's social
Yeah.
media, and most news. And then you could have urgent and important, and that you got to handle. You got to put that first priority, and then you have unurgent and important. It can wait, but you got to write it down. It's got to be on your list for sometime in the coming weeks or months. And then unurgent and unimportant is just utter nonsense,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of the flip side of, I think, what you talk about. Have you ever heard of that? I think it's Truman's grid for
Yeah.
presidential decision making.
I think it's also the Eisenhower matrix, so I can see where
Ah, it's the
Eisenhower is
Eisenhower
coming from, right?
matrix. All
So,
right, that's right. All right,
yeah, yeah.
you got me.
Although
All
I
right,
wouldn't be surprised if Truman
I knew
had
you would
something
know.
like that up his sleeve too.
Yeah,
Uh,
I knew you would know. That's great.
and I think, yeah, I mean, that's exactly kind of what the no-mergency, right, term describes, is that non-urgent, non-important,
Yeah,
thing, except that, somebody somewhere has made it urgent.
made it urgent. Okay, so they took the worst two categories of that grid and combined them. I see. Wow. Yeah.
Right, right, and we see this all the time. One of the examples that I thought was kind of funny that I included in my book is, you're shopping, in the grocery store, and you get a text from your partner that says, "Call me, urgent!" Exclamation
Right.
mark, right? And
Right.
there's like 100 things that go through your mind, what happened, right? Did the pipe
Right.
explode? Did the dog eat a chicken bone or something, right? And then you finally, you call them and they just have some kind of silly question about, was it paper towels or toilet
Right.
paper
Right.
that were out of or something, right? But that stress response is already activated, right? It's already too late. And I think that's something that we don't realize, right? When we consistently kind of respond to these surface urgencies,
Yeah.
is that they do take a toll on our body and on our mind, right? It's not a benign thing, as funny as it is.
You didn't see the LOL at the end of the text message, right? Yeah. Some funny thing they saw on Saturday Night Live last week. That's what made it urgent. Ha ha ha. Yeah. Well, can you get into a little bit of the neuroscience aspect, the working parts of your book, and the prescription that you offer for this modern malady
Mhm.
and ancient malady too? But
Yes, it's a timeless malady, I guess.
yes, yes,
I guess, except that I think it's become extremely exacerbated in today's day and age, just because it's so easy to access all of us, right? We're just at the tip of a cell phone at all times, always, right? We're just so hyper connected. But I think a lot of these kind of responses that we have to this false urgency culture really kind of stems from a lot of limiting beliefs that are kind of ingrained in us from childhood, right? We're
hmm
actually kind of conditioned to rush, right? And I don't know, I don't know if this was the same for you, but when I was like in elementary school, for example, it was always like whoever finished first, right, got to go to lunch. Whoever got dressed first got to go to recess, right? Like,
all right,
you know, all these things that I guess, people don't really think about what long-term effect it has. But
yeah,
we all have these limiting beliefs that I think are in there that we live by, such as, being busy means that you're important, right? That's one
right,
that comes up a
right,
lot. Right?
right,
Or, if I don't do it, or, if I don't do it now, then nobody will, or at least not well anyway, right? This kind of indispensability myth. So, a lot of what I talk about in my book is kind of starting to address and rewire and reframe some of those limiting beliefs that make us so susceptible to this false urgency culture. And kind of finding ways and finding evidence in our world that things are not actually as urgent as they seem. And sometimes the hardest part really is stopping and waiting and seeing what happens. But I do highly recommend that as an exercise. Start with
yeah.
something very low risk, right? Like my coworker emailed me, "Hey, can you look over these slides?" Well, okay, what happens if I don't respond until tomorrow?
Oh,
Right?
right,
Probably
right.
nothing, right? But we're so tempted to do it now, right? As soon as we see it, as soon as it pops up.
That's yeah, that's so true. It's that keeps sticking in my mind in almost in the narcissism and empathic person model, how they pair up. That if you're a physician, you're in the helping professions, you're going to tend, I think, probably to be an empathic person, wanting to care for others, having a maternal nature to you. So it
Yeah.
kind of, you almost have to stop yourself, it sounds like, from overdoing the empathy when it's not absolutely needed. And also spot those who would like to tap into your empathy for nonsense reasons, let's say. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, and I think that's where, boundaries come in, and I talk a lot about boundaries in the book as well. Um because it's super important. And I think, boundaries come up a lot. There's a lot of conversations out there about boundaries, and some, people tend to kind of see them as this brick wall that we put
Yeah.
up to keep
Yeah.
people out, right? But
Right.
I think of it more as like a gate, right?
Yes.
To where we can just be a little bit more selective about when we open it and when we close it and what comes in and what comes out. And that can be a lot more flexible than, nothing, no one bother me ever. Right. But
Right.
just be mindful about everything that we let in and when we let it in and what effect it has on our actual priorities.
I love that. Those who have known me for decades know that boundaries are a huge thing. I've always been curious about and tried to animate and draw and depict. And I love the gate idea. And they aren't just walls. I mean, walls are what are responsible for this thing called estrangement, right? Somebody's just putting up a wall, and the advice to go no contact, which is so popular, right? Because everyone is a narcissist except you. So you got to go no contact with pretty much all of humanity. That's a wall. But I've always called it a door. I like the idea of a gate or a door, and that makes a boundary flexible and it makes it adaptive. And for the first time, it makes it dynamic. Depending what's going on in the environment, you could open it a little or a lot, or close it a little or a lot, and lock it down if you want for a time, but it's dynamic. And that's our relationships with other people, right? So without the ability to make a decision about the boundary, do I open or close it in this circumstance? You can't employ conscience or ethics, and you can't employ intuition or shrewdness or worldly wisdom. Those things only come into play if it is a gate that opens and closes. So, what do you think
Yeah.
about the judiciousness of assessing someone else's urgency might seem to them to be an actual urgency or an emergency? They really believe it, but you don't deem it to be that way. How do you navigate that interpersonal difference of opinions? What do you say to that?
Yeah, and that's tricky, and I think this is where kind of the gate system of boundaries comes in, right? Because we often have disagreements, and that's kind of how relationships are, right? What's something
Right.
that's urgent to me may not be urgent to, my partner or my colleague or whatever, right? And this is where we have to kind of learn to be as flexible or not flexible as is adaptive in that moment, right? And I think also knowing the load that we're carrying, the cognitive load, especially and being mindful about that is really important, right? Because this is also part of how we burn out, right?
Ah,
This idea that we
yeah.
have to accommodate, right, everybody but us, right, until we absolutely have nothing left, right? And that's a really dangerous kind of pathway, right? So, um, just knowing what our priorities are and keeping those at the forefront of our mind, I think, is really important. And when something comes our way, uh, asking ourselves, does this align with what is important to me right now? Now, the answer may be
Right.
no, and you may still choose to accommodate that, right? But
Yes.
then that is an active choice that you're making, knowing that it's going to add to that cognitive load and perhaps take away from your ability to put your priorities at the forefront.
That's like the customer service question I was telling you about. It's not medical, it's customer service. If you're
Yeah.
just delivering to deliver. Um, I like the idea of cognitive load. I mean, that's a very old phrase. It's legitimate. It's real. I'm not so fond of emotional load, which is like this new thing. That's called being human. Like manage your emotions and manage your energy if you're an adult. Um, yeah. but I like the idea of being able to say, I am empathic. I care about your situation you're in, but at the moment, I am overloaded.
Mhm.
I can only give what I have to give. And right now at this moment, it's more than I have. Do you have any kind of prescriptive, kind of catch all techniques, diagnostic techniques, or just tactics, let's say, that people that are in the book that people can use, maybe one or two of them that you could tell us about? Like, I'm overloaded. Like, what's a catchphrase that can help you out of this, untangle this fog that you get into when you're overloaded?
Sure. And, sometimes I think it's actually very simple, because, no is a complete sentence, right? You don't have to kind of like over explain. But I think sometimes where people really get stuck is that guilt, the
Yeah,
guilt of saying no, right? And I think, this is where I kind of always like to come back a little bit to the neurobiology and the evolution of the neurobiology, because once you understand why you're feeling a certain thing, it's a little bit easier to manage, I think. So guilt, I think, is one of those things that is kind of evolutionarily ingrained, right?
yeah,
We develop
yeah.
guilt to kind of protect ourselves from some social transgression, right? That we might
Right.
make that would expel us from the tribe, and then
Yeah.
we go hungry and we go cold, right? But we're not living in those times anymore, right? We have a condo on the Upper East Side or whatever.
Right.
We're not gonna get kicked out of our tribe for saying no to reviewing somebody's PowerPoint. The stressors in our modern society are very different now. And I think just knowing that, keeping that in the back of our heads, right? Like, wait a second, I want to say no. This really doesn't align with my priorities right now. I really don't
Yeah.
have the bandwidth to take care of them. Why am I feeling so badly about this? And it's like, okay, this is part of
Yeah.
that ancient neurobiology kicking in, right? And I think once we're able to kind of label that for what it is, it's a lot easier to just say, you know what, not today.
Mhm.
I have my plate full for the next week. I'm happy to help you on Monday if
Right.
that would still be of help. Right now, that may not be of help anymore. Okay, right? You can ask somebody else, and there's no
Yeah.
need to feel guilty about that.
And that's so hard to do, for those in the helping professions or just those of a certain nature. You make me wonder, of course, evolutionarily about males and females, whether there is a difference in these. And of course, my mind first goes to Jungian psychology and his strange term archetype, which, to my understanding today, really means instinct, that there are masculine and feminine instincts. And one of the prominent ones in biological females is going to be the maternal instinct, the instinct to mother people. And then in males, colleagues of mine in London, UCL, University College London, British Psychological Society, Barry and Seeger and Kingersley and others, Luke Sullivan, have discovered the first three male instincts, and the first is provide and protect. Now, I call that the Zeus instinct. It's like a fatherly instinct, whereas the Hera instinct, as I call it, is a maternal instinct. I would imagine that if you're male and you over rely on that provider protector role, and I like calling it roles, it's an instinct. It's biologically inheritable throughout all time in our species. And in females, the Hera instinct, the maternal nature, if you over rely on that to express who you are and to get kudos and to feel valued, then over relying on that will burn you out. Whether you're male or you're female, doing this parentalism kind of thing, right? As opposed to building in other instinctual, pleasurable expressions of who you are, like sports, fighting and winning is another male instinct. In females, friendship, friendship networks, gossip is an instinct. Indulge in that more, right? What's your view of like life balance, I guess is what I'm asking. How do you do life
Yeah,
balance in this context?
that's a great point, and I think this becomes actually quite apparent in leadership, right? Those of us who are in leadership positions, this kind of paternal instinct or whatever we want to call it, really kind of comes into play when we have people that we're managing or we're leading or we're teaching or we're supervising or whatever it might be.
Yeah,
And I think one of the big dangers of that is that sense of indispensability, right? I'm the provider, or I am the mother, I'm the father, or whatever,
right, right.
and if I don't do it,
Yeah.
then nobody will, right? And I think what
And I
that
like
actually,
it.
yeah, yeah,
I even like it
exactly,
on top of all that, but it's not
exactly.
good for me to do 24/7 all the time to the point of self-neglect.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and it
Patrick
hinders the
said,
development of other people too, right?
one gentleman, it's worth noting, Brian says servant leadership, and he also
Mhm.
says service industry. I forgot to mention the service industry. It's all about that all the time. I mean, that's good service. I know these entrepreneurs in Chicago, restaurateurs. They're just world famous restaurateurs, and their secret sauce, no pun intended, is you treat every client like they are a celebrity. Every client is a celebrity. Now, imagine how exhausting that is to be a staff person treating everyone like a celebrity. It works. It's amazing to see. They must have good um, in-house programs for personal enrichment for their employees, I would imagine. But what do you think of that? Like, there are all these industries, customer service, being in a call center, service industry, restaurants, medical, medical field, education, teachers, I would imagine,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah, and these are like large systems, right?
Yeah.
That almost kind of like thrive on urgency. That is almost like the goal, right, of some of these systems is to kind of get everything done, do it quickly, make it perfect, right?
I
And
want to
I
talk
think
to the
that, yeah,
manager. I want to talk to
yeah,
your manager. Yeah. Yeah.
it happens in healthcare all
Uh,
the time too. Who's
oh, yeah.
who's the
Yeah.
head, right?
Yeah.
And it's exhausting, and I think that when the system kind of fails to differentiate between what is an emergency and what is a trivial distraction, and every event or every task is treated exactly the same, we're essentially conditioning and reinforcing, I think sometimes the wrong thing, right? And I see this all the time too. We're reinforcing the speed of somebody's response, for example, over the quality of their work.
Mm,
Right?
yeah.
How quickly can you hop on a quick call, right, or answer this email?
Or
You know,
Teams, Microsoft
yeah,
Teams, the bane of my existence. It's always urgent all the time by its very nature. Teams.
yeah,
It
yeah,
interrupts.
exactly,
It interrupts meaningful care in a lot of ways. It's bing, bing, bing. It's always in your face. Huh?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was reading a study somewhere the other day where it said that it takes somewhere between like 30 and 40 minutes to regain deep focus after you've been distracted from a
Wow.
task. And I was like,
Yes.
wow, I don't think I've ever worked for 30 or 40 minutes straight without being distracted. So I guess I never got my focus back.
Well, you make me think of suddenly. I'm thinking of Thoreau and Walden and people who go out into the woods to live in a cabin and go to the city once a month for supplies. And why do people do that? And also something I read yesterday: Americans are retiring way more, like exponentially more than ever in Europe, Portugal, Not that Portugal isn't in Europe, but Portugal's a big thing. It's affordable. Ireland is affordable. Mexico, until the cartel thing, was good. Belize, Thailand. Americans are like going abroad, and it strikes me that maybe what you're offering is the geography of the mind rather than making it literal and physical, that you have to physically go move somewhere to find calm and quiet and peace of mind and meditation. So, what would your number one tip be if I can't move to Mexico and I can't move to Portugal by next month or something? What could I do right away to bring back as fast as possible nature and the way we were wired from the beginning to be as humans in nature, calm, unless there was an emergency, like we're hungry and it's time to hunt, or a warring tribe is attacking us? That's an emergency. But otherwise, we would light fires and tell stories and raise children and tell the children stories and love each other instead of hating each other on Twitter. How do we like zap back to that more primitive and yet admirable state of mind?
Yeah, I think it's a conscious effort, and I think it's funny that you mention kind of like moving to other countries, because
Yeah.
my experience is that that doesn't work as well as people think, right? Because we can change our location, but we can't change our limiting beliefs, right? So we bring those with us everywhere we go, and
Were you
yeah.
born in the US? Were you
So
born in the US?
I'm not born
No.
in the US. I
Ah,
was born in Ukraine.
wow.
But I came here when I was a kid.
Wow.
Yeah, so we carry, I think, a lot of the habits and the limiting beliefs with us, and so I do think that the best change is within, uh, not not by
Yeah.
escaping. We can't escape ourselves, right? And so starting to kind of identify these beliefs that were ingrained in us, starting to learn a little bit about our own neurobiology and how it works, so we feel a little bit more in control when things come our way, and we can find these little pieces and patches of nature and community and stillness wherever we are. I mean, whether instead of maybe scrolling through your shopping app, you can listen to the ocean on your phone. As silly as that sounds, it
Okay. Yeah,
it's a
I like
choice.
that.
It's a choice.
I I like binaural beats too. It's kind of
Yeah.
EMDR. You can go to sleep to. Uh, I will say, Prasticha Daragaya Uchicho. Um, Let me show you something. Let me just grab something here to show you. I have to go into the other room to grab it. I think you might like this. Okay. So, my younger brother gave me this for my birthday recently. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah, we're Ukrainian in part, half
I love
Ukrainian.
it.
Yeah, my grandparents came over from Galicia area, Galicia or
Well, yeah,
Chernobyl ish. Yeah. But anyway, that's great, and I've been there when I was 17 years old. I went there on a study abroad program, so I got to see Kiev and
it's beautiful.
o- Odessa, and yeah. But there's a lot to be said for traveling the world, or traveling as much as you possibly can and experiencing as many cultures as you can to give you tolerance and also good self care too, because you see so many other world cultures better than us, way better than us at self care. And part of it is not buying into this everything is an emergency thing, right? The
Yeah.
poorest countries in the world, some of them are the happiest, except for Denmark is for some reason happy no matter what. But yeah, what do you think of life experience, travel? Um, I assume you know several languages, probably.
A
right?
couple.
Yeah, my Ukrainian is terrible.
None
Sorry.
none good
It was
enough
actually
with
Russian.
English, but yes, a lot of Ukrainians were brought up, Russian speaking, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
but travel, travel is great. I think, anything that creates a sense of awe, in
yes.
us does tend to, actually have a direct effect on our brain and our neuroplasticity and our creativity, and so, it's more than just kind of learning cultures and getting new ideas. It literally increases our brain health to witness new places and see beautiful things. And somebody in the chat put water. I agree. I
Ooh,
agree. Water.
water.
There's so many studies about water and kind of negative ions and all that that comes with being near water.
Mm.
And
Wow.
we're I'm very lucky to be, in New York City. I mean, I don't know the quality of the water, but the water is here. Uh, I
the
do
the
my best
quality
to.
the quality of the rats is top notch.
They're doing
the,
great.
the
They're
best
doing
rats in the
great.
world. Um, well, that's so interesting. One of the things that about water, one of the things that one of my oldest professors in psychoanalysis taught us was dreams don't have a literal translation book. You can't really translate the items in a dream to mean specific symbols the way certain authors like to do, right? For the last 100 years. Um, but he said, except for one, there is one symbol that does always, always mean a particular thing. And he said it's that water equals mother.
Hmm,
Water, I don't know why he said this, but he said water is always mother. And I was able to use that to good ends, I think, because many years ago I got invited to a wedding, another wedding, besides getting invited to your wonderful wedding. It was amazing, such a pleasure.
it was
But
on
many
the
years
water.
ago, right, right, and it was by water. And this other wedding I went to, like many years ago, was in Cabo, on the beach, and unfortunately, the mother of the bride, and the bride was a twin. The mother of the bride had passed on of cancer prior to the wedding, and we were surrounded by water. It wasn't just like a beach; it was you are surrounded. There's water everywhere that you can see. And I remember telling her about what this professor said, that water always means mother. So you are surrounded by your mother here at this wedding in this
That's beautiful.
peninsula.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So things like that are maybe a way out of this fog, this haze of urgency that we are so often in.
Yeah.
Symbolism might be a way, right? Art. Do you talk about art? Do you talk about stories, literature, film? Ways out of this urgency would be through art, through stories, music.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Creativity, innovation,
yeah,
right? Just
yeah.
ways to use our brain that is not just that dopamine hit of checking off our to-do list, right? And there's so much
Right.
more than that.
Yeah. While I was at your wedding, my son was with a Broadway actress caring for him at Coney Island. So he got to go break out of the doldrums and be at the amusement park. I got to go be at your wedding at that time, and it was a kind of a special story within a story for us, for my connection to my boy. And yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, except that you're getting me in a headspace that is not urgent and non-emergent. And I feel way better.
It's that
Too.
imagery of slowing down, right? That in
Right.
itself just brings us to a better place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, Katie Angelova, MD, thank you. for what you're sharing. I'm very compelled. I want to learn much more, and people should as well, because unlike all the neologisms out there that I'm always harping on, people are making up neologisms left and right that don't really mean anything and sound urgent. But yours is an uncovering of a real effect that really is at the root of a lot of our stress and a lot of our health problems and a lot of our discontent with life. So thank you for not inventing, but uncovering that deep meaning. And I hope people get your book on Amazon, No-mergency, No
Here
mergency.
it
Oh,
is.
there it
It's
is.
in
Excellent.
purple.
Oh, and it's a brain, and it's a brain that has like circuit board on the other side. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's getting, like, nice and evened out, from all
Yes.
the chaos to
Yes.
much clearer path.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. And again, for people to reach you, well, obviously here on Substack is a great place, the greatest place to reach a person, I think. But also Instagram, you are at no_mergency as your Instagram,
That's
and
right,
you
that's
will
right.
be offering coaching in this concept, and generally speaking, as a MD, board certified psychiatrist. That's pretty impressive. You don't find that a lot these days. Well, great. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much for having
Yeah.
me, Paul, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a pleasure.
Likewise. I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye bye now.